Good morning and welcome to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines' commemoration of Remembrance Day and 100th anniversary of the Poppy of Remembrance. I am Abby Tizon, Membership and Events Coordinator, and I will be your host. Today, we are honored to receive special messages from Ambassador Peter MacArthur, Ambassador of Canada to the Philippines, and Mr. Bruce Julian, Dominion President of the Royal Canadian Legion. To open our program, a welcoming remark from Mr. Julian Payne, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines.
Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us in this online event arranged by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines to commemorate Remembrance Day on this 11th day of November in 2021. Remembrance Day is, of course, the day we remember the sacrifices and the service of those who have been involved in conflict. It includes not only World War I, but World War II, the Korean War, other wars since the Korean War, leading up to, of course, the conflict of Afghanistan, and, of course, the UN peacekeeping missions. But the date is commemorated on the anniversary of the signing of the armistice that ended World War I. World War I was a horrific experience for Canadians. At that time, our population was under 8 million. Of that small population, over 600,000 enlisted in the war effort for World War I. And of that 600,000, over 400,000 traveled to Europe to be engaged in the conflict. And of that over 400,000, just under 200,000 were wounded. And of course, there were about 61,000 Canadian men and women who made the supreme sacrifice during World War I. It is for these sacrifices and this service that we remember them in World War I and all the subsequent wars that I have mentioned. It is for this reason that the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is pleased and proud to have arranged this event as our small part in honoring these heroes of our times. People have asked me, why does the Canadian Chamber of Commerce arrange such an event when its mandate is just to promote business? My answer, and my belief, is quite simple. In all the wars that Canada has been involved, Canadian business has played a major role in providing men and women to serve, in providing resources to support them, and in providing finance. Canadian business has been a major player in world wars and in other wars. It is for this reason that Canadian business should and must remember them. And it's for this reason that the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, as a business association, is pleased and proud to remember and honor them. With these few words, I would like to again thank you so much for joining us in this online event to commemorate Remembrance Day and honor those who sacrificed and served to preserve and protect the values that we cherish. Thank you so much.
Hello, bonjour. I'm Bruce Julian, Dominion President of the Royal Canadian Legion. On behalf of the Legion, thank you for taking the time to mark this special period of remembrance. Even though this is the second remembrance period affected by the pandemic, ceremonies across Canada and in other parts of the world allow us to remember our fallen veterans. We also honor those still serving in the Canadian Forces and RCMP, whether they're in areas of conflict, taking part in operations to maintain peace, or serving on humanitarian missions. No matter where we may find ourselves on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, we will all pause for 2 minutes of silence. This is the year of the poppy in Canada. In 2021, we mark its 100th anniversary as the symbol of remembrance. The idea for the symbol came from Anne Guérin of France, inspired by John McCrae's poem in Flanders Fields. She presented the poppy to the precursor of the Royal Canadian Legion in 1921, and it was accepted. 100 years later, this symbol endures. It reflects the ultimate sacrifice. The poppy is our visual pledge to never forget. But the poppy goes beyond the symbolic, because all donations made during the Legion's National Poppy Campaign have a very tangible outcome. These funds help veterans, their families, and our communities. All donations go into Poppy Trust funds, and all dollars raised locally are used locally for things like peer support programs, help from our service officers, emergency funds, and more. The Legion is Canada's largest veteran support and community service organization. A big part of our mission is to promote remembrance so that we never forget. This remembrance period, please wear a poppy to honor our veterans. Wherever you are on November the 11th at 11 a.m., please observe 2 minutes of silence. This is how we, as a nation, honor our veterans' sacrifices. We will remember them. Thank you and merci.
At approximately 0600 local time, on the morning of December 8, 1941, the British garrison at Hong Kong came under attack, heralding the outbreak of war in the Pacific. Alongside the British Army and Indian Army garrison were soldiers of the Royal Rifles of Canada and the Winnipeg Grenadiers. These young men and women, raised to reinforce the defense of a distant British outpost, would be counted amongst the very first Canadians to see action in the Pacific Theatre during World War II. Between that fateful morning and the 2nd of September 1945, 6 years later, when Canadian Colonel Lawrence Moore Cosgrave joined the Allied representatives as a signatory of the Articles of Surrender, some 42,000 Canadians would have lost their lives. They fought and fell in the Battle of the Atlantic, in North Africa, in the liberation of continental Europe, and across the Pacific. Many Canadians lost their lives fighting in World War II, including those who bravely fought alongside US and Filipino soldiers. Some were killed here in the Philippines. Their sacrifices and the sacrifices made by hundreds and thousands of others around the world were not in vain. Just 5 years later, Canadians would again answer the call, mobilizing as part of United Nations forces in the Korean War. Between 1950 and 1953, 26,000 Canadians would serve in Korea. 516 of them would lose their lives at places like Hills 404 and 419, Kapyong Hill 187, at sea off the Korean coast, and in the skies above the battlefields. Canadian personnel remain part of the United Nations Command in Korea today in the service of peace. Thus has it ever been, so it continues unto this day. Whether serving under the blue banner of the United Nations or the NATO Compass Rose, from Cyprus and Bosnia to Eritrea and Somalia to Mali and Sudan, to Kosovo and the Congo, and in Afghanistan, Canadians have volunteered themselves to the service of peace on land, at sea, and in the skies. And far too many of them have been called upon to make the ultimate sacrifice, that future generations might be spared the scourge of war. And let us not neglect those who have served alongside our armed forces. Diplomats, development workers, police officers, civil servants, journalists, and humanitarian workers too have served with courage and dedication. And they too, some of them, have made the ultimate sacrifice. Today, at 1100, on this 11th day of the 11th month, when at last the guns that had once rent the heart of Europe more than a century ago at last fell silent, I invite you to join me in observing 2 minutes of silence in commemoration of the fallen.
Thank you. 100 years ago, an inspiring woman had a vision. A bright red poppy to honor veterans who lost their lives in the First World War, and to help raise support funds to help others in the aftermath.
The idea was conceived by Madame Anna Guérin of France, sparked by John McCrae's poem In Flanders Fields. Anna had originally founded a charity to help rebuild war-torn regions of France after the First World War.
Poppies made of fabric were sold to help her charity. She presented the concept to France's allies, including the Great War Veterans Association in Canada, which later became the Royal Canadian Legion. The idea was adopted, and the poppy symbol made its first appearance in Canada on July 6, 1921, the year of the first poppy campaign to support our veterans. To mark the symbol's 100th anniversary in 2021, the Royal Canadian Legion produced a replica of the original fabric pin.
The familiar image has come to reflect the sacrifices of fallen Canadian veterans from all arms of the military and from all missions, including 2 world wars, Korea, Afghanistan, Bosnia, peacekeeping duties, and other assignments.
Canada's Parliament entrusted the Legion with the exclusive right to use the poppy as the nation's symbol of remembrance and to safeguard its image, a pledge it honors today.
100 years later, the symbol is unmistakable. Its meaning still deep.
The poppy of remembrance honors sacrifice. The poppy of remembrance cries, never again. The poppy of remembrance reflects solace and support.
Anna Guérin's vision lives on.
To learn more about how the Legion helps veterans, visit legion.ca.
The Remembrance Poppy turns 100 this year, as does our promise to never forget those who fought for our freedom. To honor this promise and preserve each soldier's memory, a new tribute is born. Introducing the Immortal Poppy. We return to the birthplace of this powerful symbol to collect the same poppies that inspired John McCrae's poem, so we could capture their beauty in exacting detail and create a digital replica as timeless as our gratitude. All 118,000 fallen Canadians grace its petals and the walls of a virtual cenotaph. Their names and memory are forever linked to the blockchain, eternally preserving them in the form of 100 collectible NFT poppies. Each NFT perpetually raises funds for the Royal Canadian Legion every time it is sold or resold, making the giving immortal too. An act of remembrance guaranteed to last beyond the next 100 years.
We would like to thank the Royal Canadian Legion for their participation. And to learn more about their advocacies and activities, please visit www.legion.ca. And also, thank you to everyone that participated in our event. We appreciate your support. Now, to close this program, here is Mr. Julian Payne, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines.
Well, I think you'll all agree that was the most moving ceremony, particularly the high point with the 2 minutes of silence to remember. Every time I attend a Remembrance Day ceremony, I am moved. I'm moved in a personal sense, like I believe most Canadians are moved. Because the fact is that many, most, if not all Canadians will have a relative, a great-grandfather, a grandfather, a grandmother, a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, a son, or a daughter who has fought in one or more of these wars. and they will see Remembrance Day not as an abstract concept, but something which recalls an event which their family was involved in, and for which they give thanks and honor for what Remembrance Day represents. But Remembrance Day has another meaning for Canada. World War I represented Canada's coming of age in terms of international recognition. Prior to 1914 and the start of World War I, Canada had very little in the way of international role or recognition. With its role in World War I and after it, it was given a seat at the peace negotiations and talks, and it signed in its own name the Treaty of Versailles. This was the first time Canada had internationally, to my knowledge, ever signed an international treaty in its own name. This led, a few years later in 1931, to the approval by the British Parliament of the Statute of Westminster, which gave the self-governing colonies of Australia, of Canada, of New Zealand, of South Africa, as well as the Irish Free State and Newfoundland, which was then not part of Canada, the legal independence as countries, which amongst other things meant they would be always signing in their own name such treaties as the Treaty of Versailles. So the contribution of those who sacrificed and served in World War I was a major contribution in the political development of Canada as an international player in global affairs, and able to sign in its own name thereafter treaties for these conflicts which we unhappily have to occasionally endure. On a very personal note, I'd just like to add a footnote. The bagpipe on which the lament was played was made in 1899. It was 15 years old when World War I started. It may well have been played by one of the Scottish regiments that fought in World War I. I would think almost certainly it was played in victory parades after the completion of World War I. So the bagpipe that played the music you heard was actually a witness to World War I and the start of the Remembrance Day tradition which we have honored here today. With these closing words, I would like to express great appreciation to the President of the Royal Canadian Legion in Ottawa, and to the Ambassador and the Embassy of Canada in the Philippines for the role and support they have given to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines in planning and implementing this event. It has been greatly appreciated and is very symbolic of three different parties that all have a vested interest and respect and wish to honor Remembrance Day. I would also like to thank the staff of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, led by Ms. Abby Tizon, who produced this show. This video online was produced in-house by Canadian Chamber of Commerce staff, with inputs, as you saw, from the Royal Canadian Legion and the Embassy of Canada. I wish to thank the staff of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for all their efforts in making this possible. Thank you so much.